Welcome to the 6 Miles to Supper podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Cox, and I've lost over 80 pounds with intermittent fasting 6 days a week, eating whatever I wanted at my meals, taking a cheat day every Sunday, and walking 6 miles a day. And I'm here to help you on your weight loss journey. In today's episode, I wanted to talk about self-sabotage. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and because it's something that's so tricky to figure out, because self-sabotage is basically when you get in your own way. You're doing kind of the opposite of what you're wanting to do, and it can be a really frustrating thing, and it can also be kind of a tricky thing to even notice yourself doing, because usually you can only see it with hindsight. Usually you've already messed up, and then you're looking back thinking, oh, why do I keep doing this to myself? And I am really good at self-sabotage, especially in the early part of the weight loss journey. I would get so frustrated with myself, and I would browbeat myself and be so mad that I was like not keeping myself in line, basically. But what I started to see eventually was that self-sabotage is really, in a weird way, self-protection. And basically the way that helps me to think of it is like this. Like, you have two sides to yourself. You have this one side that wants to change, like one side of you wants to lose weight. And the other side is like comfortable in a way. It's like the fear of the unknown, is what that side's afraid of. They just want to stay comfortable. They know that right now you're safe, basically. And so but what you kind of have to do is get those two sides to agree so that you can make progress, and so that you keep making progress. And I still struggle with this. So don't think that like you just snap your fingers one day when you see like, oh, this is what self-sabotage is. It's like a constant process. And again, it's so tricky because there's so many variables in life that sometimes you may be going along and it kind of feels like you're doing everything right with your plan, but you don't see that you're overeating, consistently. You think maybe it's just a once every once in a while kind of thing. But once you start to really observe it, you start to see a pattern, and then you start to recognize like, oh yeah, I was really stressed out right then, and that's why I was doing that back then. But again, it's usually seen in hindsight. It's harder to catch yourself in the act. I'm getting better at catching myself in the act, but I'm still by no means perfect at it. So it does help, I think, to stop seeing yourself as the enemy. I mean, that kind of word is kind of loaded to make it seem like you're your own enemy. But I would just say, just recognize it for what it is. It's just trying to keep you safe. And, for one thing that really helped me was to explore all the reasons why I was afraid to lose weight. And, it's so weird to kind of have two things that you want that are kind of the opposite. Like, for example, I was afraid that if I lost weight, that I would attract attention to myself. And I was like, I'm happily married. I don't want other guys looking at me. So one part of me wanted to lose the weight. The other part of me was like, oh, well, but I don't want to attract attention to myself. And so I found that when you can kind of root that issue out, when you can kind of name it, like, okay, here's what I'm afraid of, then you start to negotiate with yourself. So the way that looked for me was, I said, okay, so the thing I'm afraid of is getting too much attention, and that's what I'm afraid of. But I do want to lose weight, so how can I reconcile the two? And so I told myself, first of all, if you start to see that you're attracting too much unwanted attention, well, for one thing, you can control a lot of that because you can control how you dress. Okay, right? So I told myself, like, I'll pay attention to whether I am dressing provocatively or something. Like, I didn't know. I thought, what if I lose this weight and I kind of go crazy? Like, what if I start dressing in this way, like, to get people to look at me? And I didn't want to do that, but I was afraid that is how I would act. But I told myself, like, okay, first of all, you have control over that. That's not something that you're just that you must surrender to. You can figure that out as you go along, and just pay attention. And so that's what I started doing. I started paying attention. Like, as I'm losing the weight, am I suddenly wanting to get attention. And I found no, so my little deal with myself was just to pay attention to that. Like, always be vigilant that is something to watch out for. And that helped me to get past that fear, because I realized, like, okay, I have some sort of awareness of it and I can move forward. I was also afraid, that weight loss would somehow make me a worse person. I don't know really why that was a fear that kept cropping up to me. But it was, I think, because again, you get comfortable. You're like, okay, well, right now I feel like this is, I'm a good mom, I'm a good wife. And so you get kind of afraid. What if, by changing my weight, I change what kind of mom I am, what kind of wife I am. So there again, I told myself, like, I'm just going to watch my behavior. I'm going to make sure that as I go along, I'm paying attention to, like, how am I treating my family? How am I treating my husband? How am I treating my kids? And what I found was I was actually becoming a better mom, a better wife, because I was, for one, a lot more patient. As I learned patience with myself, I started learning patience with them, and I became a more calm person. I'm not perfect by any stretch, but I was improving. So that helped me to kind of negotiate with myself to say, okay, I'm gonna keep an eye on that. And that kind of that side of me that was scared was like, okay, so that side felt acknowledged and a little bit safer, I think. So then I was able to move forward. I also had to deal with, like, fear of how my body might look after I lost the weight. I was scared, really. That part of me was scared that, like, what if my body looks worse? Like, I'm not happy with how it looks right now, but what if this is much better than what it will look like when I get down to my goal weight? And I was scared of that. I mean, part of me was really afraid that it was going to make my life worse. And so it kept me from trying for a long time, from really consistently trying, because it was that fear in the back of my head, like, what if it's worse? The thing I finally had to do, because I started to see that pattern, that, like, I would start out, I would be doing some sort of plan, but then when that fear was starting to play in my head, maybe I would lose a little bit, or I would feel like it was working, then that fear would start to play, and I would, kind of just start to quit and say, well, it's probably not worth it. But I had to come up with some sort of negotiation for myself. And so I said, okay, here's what I will do. Here's the deal I'm making. I will tell myself that if I get down to my goal weight and I am unhappy with how I look, like, so in other words, like, I feel worse by being down at that weight, then I will have a couple of options. I will either allow myself to regain the weight because I was happier where I was before, or I would get surgery. And I meant that when I said it. And a really important part of negotiating with yourself is meaning what you say. And I was dead serious with myself. Like, I will either gain the weight back, or I will get that surgery if necessary, which neither one ended up being necessary, but it did give me the courage to keep losing weight. And I know that sounds weird, but I really did need that courage. And another thing that I think really helped me to prevent a lot of self-sabotage was my cheat day. One thing, again, it's uncomfortable. When you change what you're doing, it's just uncomfortable. And part of you doesn't like discomfort. Part of you wants to kind of not change, right? And so that cheat day, especially in the beginning, started out as just a way to have normalcy in my life, like one day of just being like everybody else. And it helped, because it was like having that one day of my old self, quote unquote, to just do what I wanted. And as time went on, it changed for me, as far as, like, in the beginning, I really needed that cheat day to feel comfortable, to feel like, okay, I can do the uncomfortable thing, right, of like intermittent fasting, because that's different than what everybody else in my household is doing, and pretty much everyone else around me was doing something totally different. But I was doing that 6 days a week, but that seventh day could be normal, and it helped both sides of me. Like, one side of me that wanted to change was like, okay, 6 days, you're doing the change, that's good. And that other side of me, that comfortable side of me, got the cheat day, and it was a good balance. And it helped me to not do that thing that was so common for me previous to all this, which was, like, if you've ever been on a diet and you're like, oh man, this is really tough, but you're white knuckling it, and then you just kind of crash and burn, and you have that moment. I didn't really have any of those moments once I started to learn how to negotiate with myself and gave myself that cheat day. It was just like this. I think Tim Ferriss refers to it as like a pressure relief valve, and I think that's a great way to put it, because that's what it felt like. Like, it's really hard to change, but having that one day off, it kept me from self-sabotaging through the week. And so, if you find yourself self-sabotaging, like maybe you're overeating, maybe it's like you find yourself just consistently overeating, and you think, why am I doing this to myself? And what I've found is that generally the time when it was most likely to happen for me was when things were actually going well. Like you're actually losing weight, and then just you start kind of messing yourself over. It's like, why am I doing this now? Like, what's going on? I found it helpful to always ask myself, what am I afraid of? Like, let's say I get down to my goal weight. What am I afraid of? If I lose weight, I'm afraid that what? And that brought up different things for me at different points. One really interesting thing to me that I still get baffled by it, is foreboding joy. And if you've never watched Brene Brown talk about foreboding joy, I would highly recommend it. I'll link to her talk in the show notes. So foreboding joy is like this thing that happens. It's kind of like that feeling of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, oh, everything's going great right now, so something horrible is about to happen. And that is so true of how I am. Like, I get nervous when things are going well. Like, when things are going badly and everything's kind of in chaos, I can kind of like do well because I'm like, okay, I can handle this. But when everything starts to get good, I just get afraid. Like, I know this sounds weird, but like, one thing that I would start to be afraid of is like, well, if I hit my goal weight, then that's when I'll get cancer, or that's when I'll suddenly die, or whatever. And that's, I know, a horrible way to think, but I've started to see, like in movies and stuff, that is what always happens. There's always like, at the moment of the greatest happiness, that's when tragedy strikes. And I don't know if it's just a natural human thing to be afraid of happiness that way, or if it's media to blame. I don't know, but I do know that I have that tendency. So then what can happen is, because I'm so afraid of things being good, I can create drama for myself. And I have learned that I still have a long way to go, because again, it can be really tricky to see that you're actually doing it in the moment. And so if you find yourself dealing with foreboding joy, I would just first of all encourage you, you're not the only one. I deal with it. Apparently a lot of people deal with it. Now that I've learned to recognize that for what it is, I can tell you that, I hit my goal weight. My first goal weight I hit years ago, and I'm fine, and things like, first of all, just recognizing that, making a note of it, that, I was really afraid that this was going to happen once this good thing happened, and then getting space from that. And that'll, that takes time, unfortunately. But, as I continue to remind myself and like make a mental note, oh, when I hit my new goal weight, that was immediately my thought that I was going to, start to gain the weight back, or this was the point where, my marriage would go to shambles or something like that. Or, when my marriage is doing really, really, it's doing the best it's ever done. And, the immediate thought I had the other day was like, oh no, this is when one of us dies, because that's just how my brain works, and I'm working on changing that. But I think that's not so uncommon. I think a lot of people deal with those feelings of foreboding joy. So being aware of it, and then letting, or just trying to say, okay, if this is foreboding joy that I'm feeling right now, then I need to be on the lookout for self-sabotage, because, again, it is that self-protection mechanism of like, okay, since things are good, then things will be bad. So then I need to go ahead and make them bad so things won't get bad, which, saying it out loud, that doesn't really make sense, but I think you know what I'm talking about. So I would encourage you, as you're going forward in your weight loss journey, when you notice self-sabotage, really dig into it and figure out what's going on, what you're afraid of. Are you afraid of too much attention? Are you afraid of your life just changing, maybe being different than your friends? Maybe if you are in a group of friends and you all maybe have weight problems, what will it be? What will it mean if you are now at a normal weight? Going through all those things and facing those fears, and then coming up with ways to make a deal with yourself. Okay, well, if this happens, then here's how I can deal with that. I think you'll find that you'll be able to keep moving forward, even though things, feel uncomfortable. So thank you for joining me in this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Do you want to lose the weight without getting rid of the foods you love, and that you'll go back to eating again anyway? My book, The Laid Back Guide to Intermittent Fasting, teaches you how to practice intermittent fasting so that you lose the weight sustainably and keep it off for good. You can get the audiobook read by me for free when you sign up for your 30-day trial of Audible. The link is in the show notes. And if you've gotten value from this podcast and you'd like to let other people know about it, it would be great if you could leave a review on either iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks. If you have a topic you'd like me to cover on this podcast, you can submit your request at 6milestosupper.com/podcast.